Welcome back to the channel, everybody. My name is Javier Perdomo. This channel is a place where I like to do church history videos, theology videos, apologetics videos, and in particular, a special focus on my channel is doing apologetics, dealing with the Protestant umbrella and the ecclesialist umbrella. Ecclesialism being the term that a lot of us in the space have given to all of the churches that claim to be the one true church that goes back to the apostles, that has extra-biblical apostolic tradition, and that has a number of other similarities that they share. That would include the Roman Catholics, the Eastern Orthodox, those that belong to the Assyrian Church of the East, Sedevacantist, and so on and so forth. And under the Protestant umbrella, you have obviously, Baptists, you have Methodists, you have Presbyterians, you have Lutherans, you have Anglicans, and so on and so forth. And so under those two umbrellas, a special focus on my channel is trying to do some rebuttals of the ecclesialist side, especially because they have such a big presence on YouTube. And not just rebuttals of that, but engaging with some of the arguments that they deal with, or that they give us, even just in general, just general ground level arguments. And also then under our side, exploring the Protestant umbrella, looking at the actual traditions that lie within that umbrella, and getting people from those traditions to come on, to share their story, to share a little bit about what they believe, why their tradition is special to them, and so on and so forth. And so today's video will be a rebuttal of sorts. So I guess it falls into that first category, and it'll be a rebuttal of sorts. But more than that, more than a rebuttal, it's going to be more of a correction and a setting straight of an accusation that was lobbed at James White during our interview together that he and I did. And it's an accusation that was lobbed by Sam Shamoun and Roman Catholic apologist William Albrecht, based off of, that interview that James and I did on my channel. And so for any of you that keep up with the community post, or who even saw the pinned comment, as I'll mention again later, under that same interview, this accusation is going to sound very familiar. And that is because I had a Sedevacantist Roman Catholic on Twitter lob a very similar accusation of dishonesty at some of the things that James White said, and some of the things that were said in that interview in general. And I responded to those. In fact, I responded to those with two different articles that released a week before Sam and William's live stream. And so we'll bring that up later. But again, if this sounds repetitive to some of you, it may be because you've read those articles, and I'm going to be presenting some of the same commentary and evidence here in order to correct the record. Now, that being said, I want to say a couple of things prior to actually getting down to business and dealing with the accusation that was lobbied. And first off, I want to say, William, if you're watching this video, I actually genuinely appreciate you taking the time, right? You're a bona fide Roman Catholic apologist. I appreciate you taking the time to watch my video. It's cool to hear that actual Roman Catholic apologists that are established in the space have found this little channel of mine. And so I actually appreciate you watching. It's neat to have a back and forth like this with people that are professionals on the other side. That being said, I do find it kind of unfortunate that this first kind of engagement with that sphere was based off of a misunderstanding as opposed to something truly substantive. And so I'm going to explain what I mean by that. Also, something that I'll touch on a little bit later, I find it incredibly unfortunate, some of the vitriolic comments, and I guess it goes beyond just some. It's just the general kind of vitriolic nature of the live stream that I'm responding to here, and the disrespectful tone toward not just Dr. James White, but also some of the commenters that were in the live stream. That I guess a few of the commenters seem to agree with James, and there was just a very vitriolic and disrespectful tone toward anyone that disagreed with the host, and so I find that very unfortunate. But that being said, I do appreciate you, William, watching the video. Sam, I also appreciate you, I guess, dealing with the video. My only thing that I would say is just I mentioned William as a Roman Catholic apologist because I'm more familiar with his work. I'm not exactly sure if Sam is a Roman Catholic or if he's Eastern Orthodox. I haven't watched very many of his videos, and so I'm not very sure on that, so I'm sorry if there's any inaccuracies on that. And that being said, so I will further develop this throughout the video. But before I show you some clips from William and Sam, so you can hear from their own mouths what I think were really a few of the key moments from their live stream, some of the summaries of the key accusations of the live stream, before I play those, I want to get a couple things straight. So one, I have absolutely nothing against people that believe in the perpetual virginity of Mary. So it's not only Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox, it's not only people under the ecclesialist umbrella that believe in the perpetual virginity of Mary, like they mention all the time. You have plenty of reformers that agree with the perpetual virginity. I have plenty of Protestant friends alive today that affirm the perpetual virginity. And so I don't think there's anything damnable or heretical or anything of the sort to someone holding to the perpetual virginity. That being said, I myself don't hold to it. Not because, again, I think it's damnable or anything of the sort. I don't hold to it just because I haven't seen good argumentation personally for it myself, or anything compelling for that matter. But that being said, hey, I'd be willing to change my mind if presented with a good enough case. I have nothing against it. I just personally, as of this moment, I don't affirm it. I don't think that it makes the best sense of the scriptural data. And so, that being said, the problem that I really have with something like the perpetual virginity is only when it is dogmatized, right? When you're being told, hey, you cannot be in the fullness of the church, you cannot be a member of the one true church that Jesus Christ laid down because you don't affirm the perpetual virginity. That's something that I'm not okay with. I don't stand by that. I think the perpetual virginity should be a side issue if someone wants to believe it or someone wants to not believe it. I think that there's arguments that can be made going either way. But to bring it up to a place of dogma, that's the thing that I'm really uncomfortable with, as I've alluded to in previous videos. But that's not what the focus of this video will be about. That's just something I wanted to mention at the outset. I have no hatred or dislike in my heart for anyone that affirms the perpetual virginity. I just want to make that clear. That being said, another thing that I want to make clear, right, is I have zero problem with admitting if any of my guests come on my show and they say something that's inaccurate. I have no problem with it. Just to be completely transparent, I think probably anyone that's been watching my channel for a considerable amount of time should have picked up on this from things that we say. But if you're new, whether it's William or Sam watching this video or anyone that is new watching, I want to be clear the way that I go about this. So I pick out, normally when I want to do an interview, I pick out a topic that I want to discuss. If I find a guest that I think is qualified to discuss that topic, someone that I think would be interesting to have on the channel, I reach out to them. I let them know a little bit about what this channel is. I invite them to come on to discuss the topic, to do a presentation. And I tell them that we will have a Q&A portion after that presentation. Now, because I want each video to be as substantive as it can be, what I do with all of my guests is I send them questions that I would like to ask about the topic prior to the interview, right? And I do that on purpose, so they have ample time to actually look at the questions to say, how would I like to answer this? And hopefully then that we get something more substantive than just, answering everything off the cuff. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that every question I ever ask is something that we've agreed upon before. There are times where, since I don't know what they're going to say in their presentation, and I also don't know how they're going to answer the questions that I've sent them ahead of time, there are plenty of times where I bounce off of my guests and I ask follow-up questions, I ask related questions, and then that's when some more of the fun happens, when people do have to answer off the cuff. And so we still maintain that element, although it's not the core of the Q&A period. And so that being said, due to the nature of that, since I don't know what my guests are going to say to the questions prior to being on my show, if some of them were to say something inaccurate, or they would to be not careful with something, or even as sometimes this accusation gets thrown around everywhere online, dishonesty, but in the rare case that someone was actually being openly dishonest, if someone were to point that out and say, hey, here's my case for why your guest is wrong, I have no problem saying, oh, I guess my guest was wrong in that case. Thank you for pointing that out. Or if someone says, hey, actually, here's some evidence that your guest knew about this and they were being dishonest and disingenuous, I think that's probably has a higher bar of evidence to prove malice on behalf of somebody. But if that could be presented, I have no problem with saying, oh, wow, I'm so sorry that happened. Thank you for pointing it out and affirming it. So I just want to make that clear. I have no problem ever pointing that out. I think that's part of a feature of having so many guests on the show, is that none of your guests are infallible, and so sometimes people will say things that are incorrect. Sometimes people will say things that can be contested. Hopefully, I'll reach out to anyone that would be openly dishonest, but in the case that were to happen, I have no problem dealing with it, right? I got nothing to hide. I just want to make that completely clear. That being said, I don't think James was lying. I don't think he was lying on the issue of Jerome and Mary's perpetual virginity and the argumentation that Jerome was putting forth. But that being said, before I lay out what I believe to be the main points that William and Sam made in their video, and before I show you those clips, before I summarize their main claims, before I address them, I want to show in its entirety what I believe to be the relevant clip from my interview with James White. In case you guys haven't seen the interview, this will be your first time seeing it. At least you can see the several-minute clip that is being responded to by William and Sam. And if you've seen the interview, hopefully this will just serve as a refresher. And so that being said, I'm going to go ahead and roll that footage now.
Head of the Abbey, he's like, and Jerome just destroyed the heretic Helvidius long ago. I can't believe that anyone would even question this. I mean, this is 2,000 years of history. And I know very few people who've actually read Jerome's refutation of Helvidius. And hence very few people who recognize that Jerome was quite open in that work. His whole intention there was to exalt virginity above the state of marriage. That was his whole purpose. And in arguing his position, Helvidius had quoted Tertullian, and he admitted that Tertullian did say what Helvidius said. And it's obvious that Tertullian didn't hold to things like perpetual virginity and any of the other Marian dogmas that developed later on. Talked about her sin and doubt and things like that. But what's interesting is Jerome never once even tries to suggest that anyone in the church before him had ever held the position that he presented. And he would have if there had been anyone he could point to. But he could not and did not even try to point to any tradition, anything before him on this issue of Mary's perpetual virginity. And so it even when you read it, it's contradictory to how people use it, how this St. Michael's Abbey guy was using it. Because when you read it, Jerome's not saying, oh, this is what we've always believed from the beginning, and here's this person and that person and that person. No, there was none of that, because he knew. And in fact, they're Lightfoot, and I didn't know this. Maybe you already did. You young guys are faster than us old guys. But there is evidence. Lightfoot presents evidence in his commentary on Galatians that Jerome later in his life, because remember 383 is early in Jerome's career. It's one of the first books he wrote. That Jerome later in his career seemed to have either forgotten what he had said, or maybe didn't bother to continue defending the thesis that he had presented originally, because it presents, as Lightfoot puts it, it's really indefensible exegetically. It really is. It does create insuperable problems to take the position that Jerome did.
Okay, so that was the relevant clip from James White from my interview together with him. And so with that fresh in your mind, I want to play what I believe to be the moments that encapsulate the main thrust of the argument from William and Sam's video from their own live stream. So you can hear that as well as some of the supporting evidence for their claims that they present. And so I'm going to go ahead and roll that footage now.
So in this session, though, you listened to Jamila Muhammad White and distorting Jerome, lying about Jerome, later recanting his position regarding the Theotokos being a perpetual virgin. And then you shocked me. You said, and you're going to document this.
I sure am.
Jamila Muhammad White stated that J.B. Lightfoot said what exactly?
That Lightfoot will make the argument that Jerome would later recant his position, and that you don't find examples before Jerome of the belief in the perpetual virginity. What Jerome's whole intent was, as is very clear from even before, was to defend the Orthodox Christian faith. That was his intent. He knew Helvidius was an Arian. He knew that he had to deal with yet again another innovation coming from the Arian camp. He had to deal with it when they attacked the doctrine of Christ being Almighty God, and he's having to deal with it here again. He never, not even once, will tell you, oh, well, look, virginity is superior to marriage. That is why I'm making this argument. That is never part of his argument. His argument is that it is biblical that these are not the children of Mary. And as we'll look at in a bit, he believes that it was apostolic as well to believe in the perpetual virginity, brother. 431 Ephesus, it was affirmed by Cyril. So our Oriental Orthodox brethren affirm it. And very clearly, 451, Tome of Leo, Orthodox East and West were united. Tome of Leo affirms the perpetual virginity. No apostolic church are going to deny it.
Here it is, what William quoted verbatim. You go to paragraph 19.
Yep.
Paragraph 19. And then you're going to see him say this. Okay. Might I not array against you, Helvidius, the whole series of ancient writers, Ignatius, who was a disciple of the apostles, who knew John, the bishop of Antioch, Syria, whom James quotes like it's going out of style when it comes to the Trinity, who dies a holy martyr, Polycarp, another disciple of the apostles, an eyewitness to John, who was the bishop of Irenaeus, and Polycarp also died as a martyr, and Irenaeus, his disciple. So that he's telling you the very disciples of the apostles, appointed by them, affirmed Mary's perpetual virginity and passed it on to their successors. Justin Martyr.
Yep.
Justin Martyr and many other apostolic and eloquent men.
Now, here's the important thing. The figures that we're reading about, Hilary of Poitiers, Ephraim, Jerome in a bit, Athanasius in a moment, these are the greatest defenders of the doctrine of the Trinity. Yep. If you were there in the early church, if you were there, if you would have attended a church service with them preaching at the pulpit, they would have also been teaching that Holy Mary remained an inviolate, pure, perpetual virgin. Brother, that to me tells me everything. I would rather be in the side of those men that went to their death defending the doctrine of the Trinity, and they defended this teaching rather than the side of an egomaniac like James White, brother.
Repeat what he said so people see God just shamed this liar.
Let me be very clear. James White multiple times will make the claim that in 383, Jerome taught the perpetual virginity contra Helvidius, but that he'll either forget or get embarrassed about what he wrote, and he doesn't mention it again. He will cling.
Wow.
Okay, so if I can summarize the two claims that I think are being made by William and Sam in their video, the two accusations, they would be the following. Claim number one, James White said that nobody before Jerome believed Mary was a perpetual virgin, hence why Jerome couldn't claim support from anyone prior to him believing the doctrine. And claim number two, James White lied about J.B. Lightfoot's scholarship by falsely claiming that Lightfoot believed Jerome to be novel in his belief of Mary's perpetual virginity, and that he doesn't really speak in defense of it again later in his career. And so, those being the two main claims that I think were being tackled and put forth, the two accusations of dishonesty on the part of James, I think it would be good then to go over what I believe to be the source of the misunderstanding here. And so if you'll recall from the clip that I showed with James White from our interview together, James indeed, or rather, if James had indeed claimed, right, that nobody before Jerome believed in the perpetual virginity, and that therefore Jerome couldn't claim anyone over to his side, that would absolutely be incorrect. Right, I want to make that clear. If James had said that, that would be wrong, right? And if you could provide that was the case, plus evidence that James had said otherwise, then that would be dishonest. Absolutely. But let's review what I wrote down here, the relevant composite quote of the clip I showed you earlier from James. And so James says this, what's interesting is that Jerome never once even tries to suggest that anyone in the church before him had ever held the position that he presented. And he would have if there were anyone that he could point to, but he did not even try to point to any tradition before him on this issue of Mary's perpetual virginity. Lightfoot presents evidence in his commentary on Galatians that Jerome, later in his life, because remember that 383 AD is early in Jerome's career, this is one of the first books he wrote, Jerome, later in his career, seems to have either forgotten what he had said, or maybe didn't bother to continue defending the thesis that he had presented originally. Because as Lightfoot puts it, it is really indefensible exegetically. It just creates insuperable problems to take the position that Jerome did. Now, I can see how, upon first impression, right, when you first hear this, it's an interview where we're talking about all sorts of things. This is kind of a brief part of that interview. I can see how, upon first impression and listen through, one can come away with the idea that, wait a minute, James maybe is speaking generally about the perpetual virginity of Mary. It sounds like maybe he is saying that no one prior to Jerome believed in the perpetual virginity. I can totally understand how, upon first listen through, one can come away with that idea. But that's why I made sure to bold, right, the parts that are really key for us understanding what James meant here on the quote. And so I'm going to read those again, right? What's interesting is that Jerome never once even tries to suggest that anyone in the church before him had ever held the position that he presented. Skipping forward a little bit, right? He says, either Jerome had forgotten what he had said, or maybe didn't bother to continue defending the thesis that he had presented originally. Because as Lightfoot puts it, it is really indefensible exegetically. It just creates insuperable problems to take the position that Jerome did. Now, why did I bold those sections, right? Because what is James saying? The thesis that Jerome was pushing in his writings against Helvidius on the perpetual virginity, the thesis that Jerome was defending is the one that, as he even quotes Lightfoot saying it, is defensible exegetically. It is one that Jerome seems to maybe abandon later on in his life just because he doesn't seem to continue defending it in that same way. He doesn't push that same thesis forward. And so why does James' word choice here, speaking about Jerome's thesis, when he quotes Lightfoot, talking about it being indefensible exegetically, when he talks about the position that Jerome had presented, why is this important? And why is the word choice, and not just the word choice, but the particular scholarly reference of J.B. Lightfoot, why do these things matter, right? Why should they affect the way that we understand James? Because it informs us to whether James was speaking about the perpetual virginity in general as a doctrine, or whether he was speaking about the case being put forth by Jerome. Because here's the thing, right? Jerome, in his treatise against Helvidius, he isn't just defending the perpetual virginity in general, and that's the only thing he's talking about. He's presenting a very particular argument for the perpetual virginity. And we'll get to that a little bit later. And I'm actually going to read from my blogs that I posted a week before William and Sam's video, J.B. Lightfoot talking about this. Because as it actually turns out, James is just off the cuff summarizing what J.B. Lightfoot himself, the scholar from the 1800s, had to say on this issue. But we'll get to that later. Before we get to that, I want to establish one thing, right? Because people could say, well, but maybe it is a little bit vague, and I agree. James definitely could have been a little bit more precise in his language. But, well, that was kind of vague. How do I know that James doesn't actually believe that Jerome never claimed support for the perpetual virginity in general? Well, I would point them to this clip from James White, from The Dividing Line, from 2 years ago.
So now you have the arguments from fittingness. So you have the historical arguments, which is a lot of the 2nd century fathers who probably knew Mary, or at least knew people who knew Mary, were writing that she was a perpetual virgin. Now, they would be called out if they were just making this up, and why are so many people making it up who knew the apostles? It just doesn't make sense that this doctrine just arose like that.
Okay, so there's this much historical evidence of that assertion. None. Well, Jerome said a lot of things. Okay? He's writing a long time later, and he is a participant in a debate. Okay? So there's zero historical evidence of this being true, but we continue.
And then you'll get guys like James White, who will bring out this random Gnostic text from the 2nd century.
Now, Roman Catholic scholars bring up this random Gnostic text from the 2nd century as what? The earliest reference that we have historically. This is what historians do rather than dogmaticians. This man's a dogmatician. He's not a historian. He's not dealing with history. He's defending a doctrine, and you take whatever you can, and whether it actually could end up proving anything doesn't matter. You're defending a doctrine. So this random Gnostic source is recognized by Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant scholars as the earliest reference to this concept.
Proto-Evangelium of James, and say, well, this is where it came from because this happens to refer to the perpetual virginity of Mary. And that's really just a bad argument because you don't have all of these fathers from the 2nd century who were writing before the Proto-Evangelium saying, well, this is where I got it from. I got it from this random Proto-Evangelium of James who's clearly Gnostic. Well, these fathers despised the Gnostics and spent most of their lives defending the faith against the Gnostics. Irenaeus, for example.
Okay, now I want you to see how bad this... In any meaningful church history class, if this was presented, it would have to be failed. Because here's what the argument is. Well,
that can't be the origin and source, because I'm assuming, based upon Jerome, without any documentation whatsoever, that all these guys who are writing before the Protevangelium of James, we don't know the exact date, it was fairly early, but who wrote before it, were actually teaching what I teach. And you go, show me the document. I can't, but Jerome said they were, and therefore this can't be the origin and source. This is not how you do history. This is how you cobble stuff together to defend a tradition that you did not get from Scripture.
Well, notice what James White says in that clip. He agrees that Jerome appealed to several church fathers, some who we believe probably knew the apostles, as agreeing with the perpetual virginity. But then James takes issue with the historicity of Jerome's claims, right? This isn't to say that James would dispute the existence of anybody prior to Jerome on this subject. And if he did, obviously that would be, like I said earlier, that would be incorrect, right? But James here is simply pointing out, right, when it comes to the historicity of Jerome's claims, he says Jerome claimed a lot of things. We don't really have evidence to support the claims that Jerome makes of the historicity of his claims when he cites these specific fathers, right? James is disputing the specific patristic support that Jerome claims for the view in his treatise against Helvidius. And so here's a few of the fathers, right, that Jerome cites in his polemic against Helvidius. He cites Ignatius, Polycarp, Irenaeus, Justin Martyr. These he cites, as I'll mention a little bit later and show Lightfoot talking about as well, these he cites as providing general support for the perpetual virginity, right? And then another one that he cites as potentially, and this is the only one that really is contestable as to whether he really means that this other one agreed maybe with a take more similar to the one he's presenting here, is that of Victorinus of Patavium. Probably mispronounced that. But hey, notice something. In order to say, hey, Jerome claimed that Jerome claimed a lot of things, but we really have no proof for that. To say that presupposes what? That Jerome claimed these things, right? And so if here's James 2 years ago saying, hey, I know that Jerome claimed these things, but Jerome said a lot of things, and we have no evidence for this stuff. If James is saying that 2 years ago, and you see his video today, and he's speaking with what might seem to you, right, the viewer, maybe for some of us it may have seemed like a little bit vaguer than we would like, but we have these two options. Either he's referring to the thesis that Jerome is providing in his defense, his particular way of defending the perpetual virginity, or the perpetual virginity itself, wholesale as a doctrine. And James is saying, hey, I and Lightfoot agree that Jerome is a novel in the thesis he puts forth. Given what he said 2 years ago, which one do we think is more likely the case? That James is just flat out contradicting himself and that he knew this years ago and was commenting on it and now he's got... Or could it be that he's actually referring to the other option, and that is the particular thesis that Jerome is putting forth? And when we read from Lightfoot here in a minute, you'll see exactly what I mean, because James is quite literally just summarizing the things that Lightfoot says on that latter point instead of the earlier point. And by the way, just to put it out on record, right? From what I can tell, I think James is actually correct on this point, right? None of the extant writings that we have from Ignatius, Polycarp, Irenaeus, Justin Martyr, and Victorinus express belief in the perpetual virginity of Mary, right? They actually don't even demonstrate belief in Jerome's particular argumentation. And those specific fathers Jerome cites in his favor, as far as I can tell, as I've been trying to search extra in the preparation of this video, as far as I can tell, in the extant writings we have of them, none of them explicitly come out to bat for the perpetual virginity of Mary. And so at the end of the day, these are just claims by Jerome, right? And a lot of us may like Jerome, and we appreciate and really respect Jerome, but at the end of the day, claims devoid of evidence are just that. They're just claims, right? And it may not be that Jerome is lying, right? Albrecht from 2 years ago, as we'll see in a second, had something to say about this. It may not be that Jerome is lying, right? I don't think he's lying. It very well may be that Jerome is just mistaken. But that being said, right, when it comes to us asking, well, but, maybe William and Sam didn't know of this. Maybe, like I said, it's very easy to misinterpret what James had said in the interview upon first listen through, right? Here's the issue. The relevant point for this section, right? What I want to cover. I'm not going to go in depth and say, oh, let's look at the perpetual virginity. And no. There were several people prior to Jerome that believed in the perpetual virginity. That is correct. They believed in it for, it seems, different reasons than Jerome. But there are people that believed in it. That's not really the point of this video. What I want to address are the accusations of dishonesty. And so the relevant point for this section of the video is that James clearly acknowledges the fact that Jerome claims support for the perpetual virginity as a doctrine generally, right? And he acknowledges it while disputing the accuracy of Jerome's claims. Now, this isn't a video that's deeply buried in the dark recesses of YouTube. All I had to look up, and I'll put it up on the screen here, is James White, Perpetual Virginity of Mary. And it's the first video that popped up, right? It's actually not hard to find. But then I noticed something. Look what the second video is in my feed when I looked that up. Let me roll a clip from that video.
Right here, and if you're unable to hear it clearly, go and hear it on his webpage. Go to his YouTube page and hear it. He accuses St. Jerome of being a liar. He says you can't trust Jerome when Jerome says that there is ancient history, ancient early fathers, that they all held to Mary as perpetual virgin.
So it turns out that William actually responded to James' video 2 years ago, right? And so the only reason I point that out is I think William should have known, right, that James doesn't deny the fact that Jerome claims support for the perpetual virginity, generally speaking, right? And especially from the patristic sources that Jerome lists in his treatise against Helvidius, because that's what James is making reference to in the first video clip that I showed you here. And that is the same thing that William himself is taking issue with, right? He says that, hey, James thinks that Jerome's a liar. Like I said a second ago, just because Jerome claimed his support doesn't make him a liar. People make mistakes all the time, right? And I want to be clear here. I don't like assuming that people are dishonest unless I have a lot of reason to think so. I don't like assuming bad faith from people unless I'm really forced to, unless I really, really have to. And so I want to be clear here. I genuinely and honestly don't think that William was being dishonest. I don't think that William remembered this video from 2 years ago and was just hoping that we wouldn't. I don't think any of that. I think that William and Sam misunderstood James in my interview. I think William and Sam, as I think is evident from the video, have a propensity to distrust and dislike James White and his content. And so I think in the midst of a misunderstanding, in the midst of a lot of pre-existing heavy dislike and vitriol for James, I think just there wasn't really due diligence that was done here, right? Because I think if they had just looked up James White, Perpetual Virginity of Mary, they would have seen this previous video where James clearly says that Jerome claims support for the perpetual virginity generally, and then disputes it. And then I also think it would have been helpful for them to then see their own video that they did, commenting on that exact same thing. And so I just don't think that due diligence was done in that way. And I think it's an honest mistake. People make honest mistakes. That's fine, right? Now, that being said, right, when it comes to due diligence, either they could have just looked up James White, Perpetual Virginity of Mary, and they could have seen the fact that he spoke on it, seen the fact that they actually responded to it, and then that should have informed, like, wait a minute, so do we think that he's actually saying the exact opposite now, or could it be that he's actually making a different argument, we misunderstood him? Alternatively, instead of doing that, they also could have gone to the pinned comment on my video, the very video that they were showing on the live stream, and they could have seen the 2 Substack articles that I wrote in response to the same accusation from a sedevacantist Roman Catholic on Twitter, right? And I want to be clear here. I wrote and posted those 2 articles a full week before William and Sam's live stream. And so there was plenty of time to do that, right? They could have done either of those things, and they could have realized that there had been a misunderstanding, and maybe it would have prevented not just these open accusations based on a misunderstanding, and demonstrably so, but also it could have prevented such vitriolic critiques and such a vitriolic attitude toward people in that video. But because neither of these things were done as a part of due diligence prior to the video, I think that's why we ended up with the misunderstanding that we did. And so, that being said, if James had clear knowledge of the fact that Jerome claimed ancient support for the perpetual virginity as a doctrine generally, what was he referring to when he said that Jerome couldn't claim support for his view? So let's find out, right? And let's find out by reading portions of J.B. Lightfoot's commentary on Galatians, what James made reference to. So this leads us to our second claim. I'll put them on the screen again so you guys can see it. The first claim that we dealt with is the claim that was made by William and Sam that goes more or less as follows. James White said that nobody before Jerome believed Mary was a perpetual virgin, hence why Jerome couldn't claim support from anyone prior to him believing this doctrine, right? They said that due to this claim, James was lying. So I've demonstrated, if we look back 2 years ago, James is saying the exact opposite of this. And the language that he uses in my interview, while it could have given that impression at first sight, if due diligence was done, it would have been easy to see that that's not what James was saying. And so claim 1 has been demonstrably shown to be false. Now, claim number 2, which is the one that we're about to deal with, is the following. James White lied about J.B. Lightfoot's scholarship by falsely claiming that Lightfoot believed Jerome to be novel in his belief of Mary's perpetual virginity, and that he doesn't really speak in defense of it again later in his career. Now, claim number 2 really is based on claim number 1, right? If the misunderstanding had been cleared up, if they had realized that James wasn't speaking about the perpetual virginity as a doctrine generally, then I think claim 2 also would have been very evident that it was incorrect. It would have been evident that it was wrong. But as they say themselves, that they've read Lightfoot in their video and they pull up portions of Lightfoot to disprove, unfortunately, the misunderstanding that they had originally, I would then like to pull up J.B. Lightfoot, and not just J.B. Lightfoot generally, but specifically the portions of J.B. Lightfoot that I cited in my 2 Substack articles that were released a week before Sam and William's live stream. And so let's read those relevant portions of J.B. Lightfoot's commentary on Galatians at this time. So let me pull those up for you guys on the screen and we'll get to reading. Hey, actually, before I play that clip, I want to add one more thing. Just speaking about due diligence and editing the part about due diligence, I decided to go one step further, and I actually reached out to Dr. White, and I texted him to ask him, like, hey, Dr. White, I was curious about something that you said, on during our time together, some of your comments on Jerome, and so I reached out and said this. I just want to double check with you on something you said. You wouldn't dispute the fact that people prior to Jerome existed who held to the perpetual virginity, right? You would simply agree with Lightfoot that Jerome's argumentation for it is completely novel, since most of the prior support for the doctrine came from people relying almost exclusively upon the Proto-Evangelium of James, correct? And he responded saying, right, Jerome's argumentation was novel, not his position. And so I just want to make that clear. Speaking about due diligence, I did reach out and I asked him just to double check, and that is exactly what he meant. But that being said, let's move on to the section where we check out J.B. Lightfoot's scholarship as quoted in my Substack. All right, guys, so here we have my article, again, posted a week before, this is my second article, I posted 2 actually, but this is my second one, posted a week before William and Sam's video claiming that James White was lying about Jerome. And so it's titled, Was Jerome an Innovator in His Defense of the Perpetual Virginity of Mary, Part 2, a further response to an accusation of dishonesty. Again, it's interesting because a similar claim was made by a set of a contest on Twitter prior to Sam and William, and that's what I wrote this in response to. And so, there's an introduction talking about the first article and the person that I was responding to, because I was using another modern scholar in my first article to back up what James was saying. And that scholar's name is Kapersky. But I thought I would comment on J.B. Lightfoot in this second article, and it's actually going to be useful for us in this video today. And so I want to remind everybody what claim number 1 was in Sam and William's video. What accusation number 1 is that James White was lying about Jerome. They misunderstood. They thought that James was talking about the perpetual virginity in general, as opposed to Jerome's argumentation in support of the perpetual virginity. And so we dealt with that already. Claim number 2, which we'll be dealing with here, is that James was lying about J.B. Lightfoot, the scholar from the 1800s, J.B. Lightfoot, on the topic of Jerome and the perpetual virginity of Mary. And so that is what we're going to tackle here. Again, it's just going to be, I'm sorry if you hate when I read long excerpts. I'm going to read some really long excerpts here. But I just want to put this on the record because, again, I find that claims about lying are very serious, especially when a source is freely available. I found this PDF free online that I'm quoting from. And so this is J.B. Lightfoot's commentary on Galatians. And so before we get to the most relevant part here, I'm going to show you J.B. Lightfoot commenting a little bit in general about Jerome and the perpetual virginity, him actually laying out Jerome's case, like when we talk about what is this argument, this new argument Jerome is putting forth, what is that? J.B. Lightfoot will actually explain it for us. And so I'm going to read that out loud for us here. And then we're going to read J.B. Lightfoot saying in much greater detail the exact same thing that James White was saying. Because James wasn't making it up. He was citing J.B. Lightfoot, the scholar that he mentioned in that portion of my video, which unfortunately William and Sam said that J.B. Lightfoot was being lied about. So that's claim number 2 we'll be tackling here. Was James misrepresenting or lying about J.B. Lightfoot? Let's find out. So I'm going to start with my Substack article here. On page 89 of his commentary on Galatians, Lightfoot introduces Jerome's involvement with defending the perpetual virginity, saying, quote, "Such was the state of opinion when towards the close of the 4th century, Jerome struck out a novel hypothesis. One Helvidius, who lived in Rome, had attacked the prevailing view of the superiority of virgin over married life, and in doing so had laid great stress on the example of the Lord's mother, who had borne children to her husband. In or about the year 383, Jerome, then a young man, at the instigation of the brethren, wrote a treatise in reply to Helvidius, in which he put forward his own view. He maintained that the Lord's brethren were his cousins after the flesh, being sons of Mary, the wife of Alphaeus, and sister of the Virgin. Thus, as he boasted, he asserted the virginity of Mary, not of Mary only, but of Joseph also." And so I'm going to, again, read it out because I want you guys to hear Lightfoot explaining this in detail. But that is the view, right? Jerome maintained that the Lord's brethren were his cousins after the flesh, being sons of Mary, the wife of Alphaeus, and sister of the Virgin. So let's read forward, right? Skipping forward a couple pages. On pages 91 through 94, Lightfoot recounts Jerome's unique view as follows, quote, "St. Jerome then states his view in the treatise against Helvidius, somewhat as follows. The list of the 12 apostles contains 2 of the name of James, the son of Zebedee and the son of Alphaeus. But elsewhere we read of one James, the Lord's brother. What account are we to give of this last James? Either he was an apostle or he was not. If an apostle, he must be identified with the son of Alphaeus, for the son of Zebedee was no longer living. If not an apostle, then there were 3 persons bearing this name. But in this case, how can a certain James be called the less, a term which implies only one besides? And how, moreover, can we account for St. Paul's language, 'Other of the apostles saw I none, save James the Lord's brother'? Clearly, therefore, James the son of Alphaeus and James the Lord's brother are the same person, and the gospel narrative explains his identity. Among the Lord's brethren occur the names of James and Joseph. Now it is stated elsewhere that Mary, the mother of James the Less, and of Joseph, or Joses, was present at the crucifixion. This Mary, therefore, must have been the wife of Alphaeus, for Alphaeus was the father of James. But again, in St. John's narrative, the virgin's sister, Mary of Cleophas, is represented as standing by the cross. This carries us a step in advance. The last mentioned Mary is to be identified with the wife of Alphaeus and mother of James. Thus, James, the Lord's brother, was in reality the Lord's cousin. But if his cousin, how is he called his brother? The following is the explanation. The term brethren is used in 4 different senses in Holy Scripture. It denotes either 1, actual brotherhood, or 2, common nationality, or 3, kinsmanship, or 4, friendship and sympathy. These different senses St. Jerome expresses by the 4 words natura, gente, cognitione, and affectu. In the case of the Lord's brethren, the third of these senses is to be adopted. Brotherhood here denotes mere relationship, just as Abraham calls his nephew Lot brother, and as Laban uses the same term of Jacob, his sister's son. So far, St. Jerome, who started the theory, but as worked out by other writers and is generally stated, it involves 2 particulars besides. The identity of Alphaeus and Clopas. These 2 words, it is said, are different renderings of the same Aramaic name, sobi or wavy, Kalphai. The form Clopas being peculiar to St. John, the more completely Greekized or Grecized Alphaeus, taking its place in the other evangelists. The Aramaic guttural Cheth, when the name was reproduced in Greek, might either be omitted as an Alphaeus or be replaced by an X as in Clopas. Just in the same way, Aloysius and Ludovicus, again, sorry guys, mispronouncing names, are recognized Latin representatives of the Frankish name Clovis. This identification, however, though it materially strengthens his theory, was unknown to Jerome himself. In the course of his argument, he confesses plainly that he does not know why Mary is called Clope, or Clophe, as he writes it. It may be, he suggests, after her father, or from her family surname, or for some other reason. In his treatise of Hebrew names, too, he gives an account of the word Alphaeus, which is scarcely consistent with this identity. Neither have I found traces of it in any of his other works, though he refers several times to the subject. In Augustine, again, who adopts Jerome's hypothesis and his manner of stating it, it does not anywhere appear so far as I know. It occurs first, I believe, in Chrysostom, who incidentally speaks of James, the Lord's brother, as son of Clopas, and after him in Theodoret, who is more explicit, to a Syrian Greek, who even if you are unable to read the Peshitta version, must at all events have known that Calphi was the Aramean rendering, or rather the Aramean original of Ardaios, it might not unnaturally occur to graft this identification of the original theory of Jerome. Number 2. The identity of Judas the Apostle and Judas the Lord's brother. In St. Luke's catalogues of the 12, the name Judas of James occurs. Now we find a Judas also among the 4 brethren of the Lord. And the writer of the epistle, who was doubtless the Judas last mentioned, styles himself the brother of James, Jude 1. This coincidence suggests that the ellipsis in Judas of James should be supplied by brother, as in the English version, not by son, which would be the more obvious word. Thus Judas, the Lord's brother, like James, is made one of the 12. I do not know when the Hieronymian theory received this fresh accession, but though the gain is considerable, in apparent strength at least, it does not appear, so far as I have noticed, to have occurred to Jerome himself. And some have gone a step further. We find not only a James and a Judas among the Lord's brethren, but also a Simeon or Simon. Now it is remarkable that these 3 names occur together in St. Luke's list of the 12, James the son of Alphaeus, Simon called Zelotes, and Judas the brother of James. In the list of the other evangelists too, these 3 persons are kept together, though the order is different, and Judas appears under another name, Lebbaeus or Thaddeus. Can this have been a mere accident? Would the name of a stranger have been inserted by St. Luke between 2 brothers? Is it not therefore highly probable that this Simon also was one of the Lord's brethren? And thus 3 out of the 4 are included among the 12. Without these additions, the theory is incomplete, and indeed they have been so generally regarded as part of it that advocates and opponents alike have forgotten or overlooked the fact that Jerome himself nowhere advances them. I shall then consider the theory as involving these 2 points, for indeed it would never have won its way to such general acceptance unless presented in this complete form, where its chief recommendation is that it combines a great variety of facts and brings out many striking coincidences. And we'll pause right there for a split second. Now, before I read the most relevant section from Lightfoot, again, sorry if I put anyone to sleep with that long quote, I just wanted to show, for context's sake, this is the argument laid out by Jerome, and even as the second half of that quote demonstrated, actually the argument in a fuller demonstration than that which Jerome gives us. But this is the argument, right? That these are the brothers of Jesus are actually the cousins of Jesus. This is the argument that Jerome puts forth. Now, again, remember, let's keep in our mind for this next section, really important. William and Sam said that James was lying about Lightfoot, that Lightfoot did not actually agree with James. Now, granted, claim number 2 was relying on claim number 1, so the fact that they misunderstood claim number 1 that they made, that was a false claim, presents problems with claim number 2, but I want to demonstrate that James is quite literally just summarizing J.B. Lightfoot. Now, before I read that, I want to say this one more time so that we all understand. My Roman Catholic friends, William, Sam, you're watching this video. Thank you for staying this far. If you want to disagree with James and J.B. Lightfoot, that's perfectly fine. Disagree with them. But please, please, it does not advance the quality of the dialogue in our sphere and this corner of YouTube when we just accuse each other of lying, especially when the resources we need to see that it's not a lie are freely available on the internet. And so this is what Lightfoot says. So on pages 94 through 97, he makes these comments that are most relevant to what we're talking about. Quote, "But before criticizing the theory itself, let me prepare the way by divesting it of all fictitious advantages and placing it in its true light. The 2 points to which attention may be directed as having been generally overlooked are these. Number 1, Jerome claims no traditional support for his theory. Number 1, Jerome claims no traditional support for his theory. I'll say it one more time because it's really important. Jerome claims no traditional support for his theory. This is a remarkable feature in his treatise against Helvidius. He argues the question solely on critical and theological grounds. His opponent had claimed the sanction of 2 older writers, Tertullian and Victorinus of Ptah. Jerome, in reply, is obliged to concede him Tertullian, whose authority he invalidates as not a member of the church, but denies him Victorinus." Now, this is a point that I'm not going to go crazy going over it. I know William and Sam in their video actually contest this. They would say that they would argue that Tertullian does not, in fact, disagree with the perpetual virginity. That's outside of the scope of this video. I've seen other scholarship that says otherwise. But putting that aside, right? They say, well, Jerome actually is not conceding Tertullian. I want to make a brief comment here. When you're in a debate with somebody, and that person says, here's my argument, and also, here are the people in support of my argument. If you are aware that the people that they're claiming to be in support of their argument don't even agree with them, even if you don't like the sources, any person that's familiar with debate would never pass the opportunity up of pointing that out, right? And so this is just a brief observation that I'll make on this issue before we continue is Jerome, when it comes to Tertullian, doesn't say, actually, Tertullian's a heretic, so I don't really care what he has to say, and also he disagrees with you anyway, so it's irrelevant. Jerome doesn't say that. Jerome doesn't comment on whether or not Tertullian agrees with Helvidius or goes against Helvidius. All he says is that he will not comment on Tertullian further, besides saying that he's, quote, not a member of the church, unquote. And so that's not really the slam dunk that it seems like Sam and William are presenting on their side. Putting that aside, here's the key thing for this section. James is repeating what J.B. Lightfoot is saying. That is what he's saying. He's repeating what J.B. Lightfoot's saying. Now, when it comes to then Jerome denying Victorinus, this is actually an area where, just like I did in my article to the site of a contest on Twitter, I'll say right now, if they want to dispute that, right, they could say, well, actually, no, Jerome denies Victorinus, like J.B. Lightfoot says, but not just on the perpetual virginity in general. He's doing it, if I remember the language of the treatise against Helvidius correctly, where Jerome claims that Victorinus agrees with him, seeing the Lord's brethren as kinsmen in the manner that I, Jerome, have described, or something of the sort. So if they want to argue, hey, actually, I think that is Jerome claiming support for this theory, they can argue that. I think there's a question there as to what that even necessarily means, and what manner Victorinus is supposed to be agreeing with Jerome. But I want to say one more time, from what I understand, and again, I'm willing to be proven wrong. Like I said, I have no problem admitting if I get something wrong. As far as I can understand, we have zero evidence that Victorinus actually agrees with Jerome. Zero in any extant writings. And so even if you want to say, no, I guess he is claiming Victorinus, you guys overspoke, maybe I want to argue he is claiming at least one person, you could do that. But again, that's very different from simply claiming this is dishonesty, this is lying, this is relying on people not checking the sources. I don't think that's fair. And it definitely isn't fair to say that James is making it up and Lightfoot doesn't agree with him when he says the exact same thing. Now, let's continue with Lightfoot. Can it be doubted that if he, Jerome, could have produced any names on his own side, he would only too gladly have done so? When, for instance, he is maintaining the virginity of the Lord's mother, a feature possessed by his theory in common with the Epiphanian, this is the Epiphanian theory that J.B. Lightfoot speaks of in his commentary, he is at no loss for authorities. Ignatius, Polycarp, Irenaeus, Justin, and many other eloquent apostolic men occur to him at once. This is exactly what James White's agreeing with, right? When it comes to the perpetual virginity in general, Jerome claims these people. That's what the clip that I showed earlier from 2 years ago, that's what James says. Yeah, Jerome's claiming these people, but he's a participant in a debate, and we have zero evidence that the people he's claiming even support that. But everyone here is in agreement. Lightfoot, James, myself, everyone agrees that Jerome claims these people. Notice, in maintaining the virginity of the Lord's mother, a feature possessed by his theory in common with the Epiphanian theory of the perpetual virginity. These are authorities that are being claimed for the general theory, the general claim that's being made, that Mary remained the virgin. We will dispute those, but putting that aside, I want to keep in mind, even on that level, even on the level of just the perpetual virginity in general, it is my understanding, what I have seen, if someone has something out there, please let me know, and I'll gladly say, oh, hey, look, someone pointed this out. Now I know. As far as I know right now, neither Ignatius, nor Polycarp, nor Irenaeus, nor Justin Martyr openly and explicitly support the perpetual virginity of Mary, at least as far as I know. And again, please, someone, correct me if you have an explicit mention of that in their writings. But as far as J.B. Lightfoot is saying in the 1800s, as far as James White is agreeing with him, really that's irrelevant, because these people are being brought up by Jerome at the end of his treatise. They're not being brought up by Jerome throughout his treatise. So this would be different, for example, if Jerome had said, let's say, well, actually, because they're his cousins, as Polycarp said, or hey, I would like to defend that James is the cousin of Jesus, as Irenaeus himself believed. Jerome doesn't say that, right? He presents his exegetical case. He makes fun of Helvidius throughout his treatise. He's very polemical. And nowhere throughout the body of his treatise is he bringing up these names. These names are said at the very end, right, when he's dealing with some of the support that Helvidius claimed for his view. And so let's keep that in mind, right? But this is irrelevant when it comes to whether or not these individuals agreed with Jerome's unique thesis that he's putting forth, because we have no evidence that they did. And based on the way that he's quoting them at the very end in a very generally speaking way, that doesn't seem to imply that he thinks they agree with all these specific points he's been laying out throughout the treatise. Now, that being said, but let's continue with the quote. But in support of his own account of the relationship, he cannot, or at least does not, name a single writer. He simply offers it as a critical deduction from the statements of Scripture. I'll read it again. But in support of Jerome's own account of the relationship, he cannot, or at least does not, name a single writer. He simply offers it as a critical deduction from the statements of Scripture. Again, in his later writings, when he refers to the subject, his tone is the same. Quote, some suppose them to have been sons of Joseph. It is my opinion, I have maintained in my book against Helvidius, that they were the children of Mary, the virgin sister, end quote. And the whole tenor of patristic evidence, as I shall hope to show, is in accordance with this tone. No decisive instance can be produced of a writer holding Jerome's view before it was propounded by Jerome himself. No decisive instance can be produced of a writer holding Jerome's view before it was propounded by Jerome himself. This is exactly what James was saying. This is exactly what James was saying. And so if you're someone at home and you're like, well, I don't want to give James the benefit of the doubt. I think that he was, in fact, lying, contradicting himself from 2 years ago. Why would the summary that he's providing follow up point by point with what J.B. Lightfoot is saying about Jerome's specific argumentation for the perpetual virginity? That wouldn't make any sense. Or rather, I guess that's a really, really big coincidence. But in reality, it doesn't make any sense. And so, again, no decisive instance can be produced of a writer holding Jerome's view before it was propounded by Jerome himself. What is the view being talked about? Jerome's view, even the same way that James is talking about it, is that just the perpetual virginity in general? Is J.B. Lightfoot contradicting himself one paragraph, less than a paragraph, after he says that Jerome had plenty of support he was citing for the doctrine generally? No. Jerome's view is the cousin view that he's putting forth. That is what J.B. Lightfoot is talking about. So continuing, because again, what's the other thing that James said? That Jerome either, because he holds the theory very inconsistently, seems to either have forgotten about it or just remembers it but doesn't want to defend it. Maybe he realized it wasn't what he thought it was. Speculation, whatever it may be, he doesn't hold it later on in his life, or at least he doesn't seem to, the way that he writes. Was James making this up? Let's find out. Number 2, Jerome does not hold his theory staunchly and consistently. Jerome does not hold his theory staunchly and consistently. The references to the subject in his works, taken in chronological order, will speak for themselves. The theory is first propounded, as we saw in the treatise against Helvidius, written around 383, when he was a young man. Even here, his main point is the perpetual virginity of the Lord's mother, to which his own special solution is quite subordinate. He speaks of himself as not caring to fight hard for the identity of Mary of Cleophas, with Mary the mother of James and Joseph, though this is the pivot of his theory. And as time advances, he seems to hold to his hypothesis more and more loosely. J.B. Lightfoot. And as time advances, he seems to hold to his hypothesis more and more loosely. In his commentary on the Epistle to the Galatians, written about 887, he speaks very vaguely. I think 887 here, I don't know if that might be a typo, but in either case, he remembers, he says, having, when at Rome, written a treatise on the subject, with which, such as it is, he ought to be satisfied, after which he goes on, inconsistently enough. Suffice it now to say that James was called the Lord's brother on account of his high character, his incomparable faith, and extraordinary wisdom. The other apostles also are called brothers, but he preeminently so, to whom the Lord at his departure had committed the sons of his mother, i.e. the members of the Church of Jerusalem, end quote. With more to the same effect, Lightfoot continues, and he concludes by showing that the term apostle, so far from being confined to the 12, has a very wide use, adding that it was a monstrous error to identify this James with the apostle, the brother of John. In his Catalogue of Illustrious Men, AD 392, and in his commentary on St. Matthew, AD 398, he adheres to his earlier opinion. referring in the passage already quoted to his treatise against Ovidius, and taunting those who considered the Lord's brethren to be the sons of Joseph by a former wife, with following the ravings of the apocryphal writings, and inventing a wretched creature, Melcha or Esca by name. He's making reference to the Proto-Evangelium of James. Which, by the way, just so we're clear, if you guys want to read the first article, the one that preceded this one when I wrote them on my Substack, I cited the master's thesis, I believe it was, of a modern scholar on this issue, where he talks about the fact that Jerome, right prior to him, you have everyone really coming up with different understandings, different theories about how Mary could be a perpetual virgin for those that held to that doctrine. And the most popular thing that people were doing is they were taking the Proto-Evangelium of James, at face value. And so they think that there's this midwife that's involved, there's this whole scene that happens with this glorious cloud and this light, and there's all these things that happen in that apocryphal story, a story which Jerome himself, again, doesn't look upon favorably. He calls it, like we just saw a second ago, or rather, he charges people that seem to care about it with following the ravings of the apocryphal writings and inventing a wretched creature. If I remember correctly, I think Melcha is the midwife in the Proto-Evangelium. And so, continuing with Lightfoot's quote, yet after all, in a still later work, the Epistle to Hedibia, about 406 or 407, enumerating the Marys of the Gospels, Jerome mentions Mary of Cleophas, the maternal aunt of the Lord, and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, as distinct persons, adding, quote, although others contend that the mother of James and Joseph was his aunt, end quote. Yet this identification, of which he here speaks with such indifference, was the keystone of his own theory. Can it be that by his long residence in Bethlehem, having the Palestinian tradition brought more prominently before him, he first relaxed his hold of and finally relinquished his own hypothesis? If these positions are correct, the Hieronymian view has no claim to any traditional sanction. In other words, there is no reason to believe that time has obliterated any secondary evidence in its favor, and it must therefore be investigated on its own merits. And compact and plausible as it may seem at first sight, the theory exposes, when examined, many vulnerable parts. And so that's where I finished quoting J.B. Lightfoot in this article. J.B. actually moves on from this point to in his own words, like dismantle and take apart and refute the view of Jerome exegetically. But I want to be clear here, and I guess I'm going to read actually from my own little section here in the article. Lightfoot goes on from this point to further critique Jerome's views on the topic of Jesus' brother. But that is beyond the scope of this post. We'll end this video. As one can plainly see from reading these excerpts, James White was not making up this take on Jerome on the spot. In fact, it is not even his own take. It is that of celebrated English scholar, theologian, and Bishop of Durham, J.B. Lightfoot. And so that's what I want to get across with this section here. Claim number one, unfortunately, that William and Sam made was based on a misunderstanding. I would like to assume a good faith misunderstanding. They misunderstood it. Maybe they were carried along by a general distrust of James. It happens to all of us. But then building on that first misunderstanding, they built upon that a second claim of dishonesty that was equally wrong. As we've demonstrated here, James is quite literally just summarizing Lightfoot offhand. That is what he was doing. And so I think that's enough for this second part of the claim that we were addressing. And so let me go back to not having the blog on the screen. All right, guys. And so that covers really the two biggest accusations that were made. I want to say one more time, I think this was a big misunderstanding. I do want to say, though, although it was a big misunderstanding, it is one that was fueled, like I said earlier, by a lack of due diligence. They could have found my blog that I just read to you guys. They could have found William and Sam, that is, could have found James White's video that they responded to 2 years ago and gone over that. They could have gone to James White's plenty of other videos and seen what his view is. They could have actually pulled up a portion of J.B. Lightfoot on their show. They could have read the rest of J.B. Lightfoot's section on this issue and realized that the similarities were striking and that everything that James was saying was matching what J.B. Lightfoot was saying, just on a topic that was different than the one they had understood originally. And so there was a lack of due diligence. But I think, and I really want to cover this, and I want to cover this because I find it important. It wasn't just due diligence, or lack of due diligence, but it's a lack of due diligence, in my opinion, fueled by an open vitriol and dislike and again, if I may say so, at least it appears this way. Please, you tell me if you think I'm incorrect. Hatred, not just for James White, but it seems like sometimes even for people that just disagree. And it's something that I want to show here. A small compilation of a few of these moments throughout the 2 hour long live stream. So some of these are Sam and William interacting and talking to and about James White. Some of these are comments that you'll see when they pull them up on the bottom of the screen. Sometimes they're actually responding to, they had like one or two people, I think, in the live stream comments that were agreeing with James. And so you'll see the way that they treated them. But I want us to see these because, again, this wasn't a misunderstanding that happened in a vacuum. I really do think this misunderstanding happened because of this open dislike or even hatred for James and the people that disagree. And so I'm going to show you guys these clips, and I guess really ask yourself if you see these, right? And things like, for some reason, changing James' name to something like Jamila or something like that. I guess switching it to what they consider to be, I don't know if that's a female name or what it is. You'll see the way that they speak sometimes about not just James, calling him all these names and insults, the way they speak about, like I said, people in their comment section that just disagree with them. And I want us to look at this because I think this really should inform why this misunderstanding happened. And I'll have a few brief comments after that. And so I'm going to show you a compilation of a few of these moments.
And I'm going to say it on the air. Jimmy, you're a fraud, buddy. You are a fraud.
You are Jamila Mohammed White. By the way, sister, I don't mean to disrespect your cousin Jamila. She's a real Jamila. This guy's a fraud, but go ahead.
No doubt, brother.
This is an example of what happens to a man who's so proud and arrogant and what the Lord does to him. Now watch how nasty he is. Just look at his face. I'm not lying.
Yep.
Compare the White of the 90s to what he looks like now. I knew this man was crooked and God is rebuking him. Lord Jesus, please in your love save us from being like this. I knew the man is a deceiver and a liar, and he doesn't handle church history with any integrity. He butchers them to deceive people, not to become Catholic or Orthodox, but the ancient church. Okay. But I didn't think he would be this dishonest or outright stupid.
He's laughing it up in the video. Laughing it up.
Like a narcissistic demon, yeah.
He is a narcissist. He is an egomaniac.
Byron, I want you to ask your mother to tell you about Muta because she's known for doing Muta. Okay. Byron, stop being a son of Satan and a spiritual bastard. We have hundreds of sessions on Matthew 125. You're not the first son of the devil, pervert, spiritual bastard that came up with it. Go to your vomit before we bury you in Matthew 125. Shut your mouth. Dave, I'm going to insult your mother if you have no respect for the Blessed Mother. I'm going to insult your mother to show you if you dishonor the Mother Lord, I'm going to cuss your mother out because you're a bastard. Stop using arguments that have been buried long ago. Stop being Jamila White's favorite groupie. Stop burning candles to Jamila White, your lover. This argument shows you're stupider than Jamila White.
I mean, I don't know. I almost want to say that kind of speaks for itself. I think there was, like, as you guys know, for those of you that have watched the channel for a while, I'm perfectly okay with calling a position silly. I'm okay with calling a position stupid. I'm okay with even a little bit of humor, right? Like parody content, content that pokes fun at something. What I'm not really okay with is mean-spirited, malicious slander, talking about people's mothers, and calling people spiritual bastards, calling for some reason again calling people by female names when they're men, insinuating that they're having relations with other people that they care about. Very, very, very bizarre. And so the only reason I want to show that is because, again, I just want to demonstrate what I think blinded Sam and William, unfortunately, to the very clear and obvious mistakes that were made in their response. And instead of, double checking sources, instead of looking at the comments under my video to see my blogs, instead of looking at just actually doing due diligence, what happened was, it's at least this is what I would say, and again, I guess someone tell me if you think I'm wrong. I think blinded by what seems like rage, what seems like distaste, what seems like hatred, frankly, they decided to then turn around and churn out the live stream that they did. And so that's what happened. I personally don't like engaging with people in this way. I don't like insulting people like that publicly. I don't like demeaning them. I don't like demeaning their mothers. I think that's very uncalled for. I don't think that that is Christ-like behavior. And I know that a lot of the time when this gets pointed out online, people immediately go to saying, oh, but the prophets spoke in this way. Oh, but Jesus spoke in this way. Are you Jesus? Are you a prophet? Are you inspired by the Holy Spirit to speak to the people of God in a given way? Because I don't think so, right? And so the Lord Jesus, he's God, right? He has a right to speak to whoever in whatever way that he wants, and he's God, so we know he's never going to do anything wrong or anything uncalled for. The prophets, being the mouthpiece of the Lord, the prophets will speak what the Lord wants them to speak. Right? So the Lord, same thing applies. The Lord can say whatever he wants, and it's not going to be wrong. He's God. He's not going to act in a way that goes contrary to himself. Right? So he's never going to do something wrong. But you're not Jesus, and you're not a prophet, and unless you have divine revelation from the Lord that it's okay to slander people, that it's okay to speak maliciously of their mothers, that it's okay to speak maliciously of their character, that it's okay to do all of these things, then you're in the wrong. And that is what I think when it comes to that. And there's a video that I think I'll probably link it in the description below, a video that I really like by Dr. Jordan B. Cooper, speaking on this subject of how it is that we speak to one another online, how it is that we should seek to be Christ-like in that way, and even addressing some of these counter arguments about, oh, but the prophets, but Jesus. And so I'll link that below. It's a video that I enjoyed on that issue. And so I just want to say I didn't appreciate that. And not only did I not appreciate it, I mean, at the end of the day, we're men. Words are not going to hurt me. It's whatever. I think it's not redeeming the time, and it's not only not redeeming the time, but it's not a good example to people that are not Christians watching these videos. That is how they think Christians argue with one another. That's how they think Christians behave toward one another. It's not even being rhetorically aggressive. It's just actual downright nasty. And I think that's not okay. And so I wanted to put this section here, and I'm gonna close this out here by reading a verse or two real quick if I can pull them up. Ephesians 4, verse 25 through 32. Therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down in your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil. Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it might give grace to those who hear. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you.